Blood dripped from the wolf pup's muzzle onto Audrey's trembling hands. She knelt in the snow beside the riverbank her father had forbidden her to approach, staring into frost-blue eyes that held an intelligence no animal should possess. The pup's ribs shuddered with each shallow breath. Silver-tipped arrows pierced his flank, and strange luminescent markings pulsed beneath his midnight fur, patterns that seemed to shift and glow when moonlight touched them. "Monsters feed at the river," her father's voice echoed in her mind. But the monster wasn't the dying creature before her. It was the cruelty that had left him here to suffer. It was the coldness that had taught her that mercy was weakness, that compassion was foolishness, that survival meant keeping your head down and your heart closed. Audrey's fingers found the pup's scarred muzzle. "I won't leave you to die," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not like everyone else did to me." The wolf's eyes, impossibly human, impossibly aware, locked onto hers with something that looked like recognition. Like gratitude. Like a promise neither of them understood yet. What Audrey didn't know, as she lifted the impossibly heavy pup into her aching arms, was that she had just saved the heir to a cursed throne. That her single act of defiance would bind her soul to a king. That 23 years later, that dying pup would return as the most feared monarch in the realm, wearing a crown shaped like a wolf's head split by moonlight. And he would kneel before her. Subscribe now if you want to know what happens when a forgotten act of kindness rewrites the fate of kingdoms. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, what country or state has you here right now. I read every single one. Backhand index pointing down ***. 3 hours earlier. The kitchen door slammed so hard the windows rattled. Audrey froze on the threshold, snow melting from her too thin coat, forming puddles on the stone floor her father would make her scrub later. If she was lucky. If he was in a merciful mood, which happened about as often as summer snow. "Where have you been?" Marcus Reyes stood in the doorway to the parlor, backlit by dying firelight, his frame casting shadows that seemed to reach across the room toward her like grasping fingers. His face was carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding their isolated homestead, all sharp angles and weathered hardness, softened by nothing, warmed by nothing. Not since Audrey's mother had died 6 years ago, leaving her alone with a man who'd buried his grief so deep it had frozen everything else inside him. "I couldn't sleep," Audrey said quietly, staring at the puddles forming around her worn boots. "The cellar window was broken. You went outside." His voice was flat. Dangerous in its stillness. "In a storm. In the middle of the night. When I have told you, how many times have I told you, Audrey, that you stay inside after dark? Because that's when monsters feed," she finished silently, having heard the warning so many times it had worn grooves in her mind. But she'd learned young that arguing with her father was like arguing with winter, pointless and likely to leave you colder than before. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't change what is." He crossed the kitchen in 4 deliberate strides, each footfall heavy with barely controlled anger. When he gripped her chin, not gently, never gently, and forced her face up, Audrey kept her eyes carefully empty. She'd learned that too. Show nothing. Feel nothing. Survive. I feed you. I keep a roof over your head. I don't send you to the workhouses like I could, like you probably deserve, sneaking around like some feral thing. His breath smelled like the whiskey he pretended he didn't drink. "And this is how you repay my charity. By disobeying the one rule that keeps you safe." Safe from what? The question burned in Audrey's throat, but she swallowed it. Her father's rules weren't about safety. They were about control. About keeping her small and scared and obedient in a world that had taken the one person who'd ever made him feel anything other than bitter. But Audrey had stopped arguing about that years ago, around the same time she'd stopped expecting him to remember her birthday or ask if she was cold or notice when she went to bed without dinner because there wasn't enough food and he'd eaten first. "I won't do it again," she said. The lie came easily. Everything was easier when you stopped fighting. Marcus released her with a dismissive grunt. No breakfast. No supper. Maybe hunger will teach you what words don't. He turned toward the hallway, then paused. And you'll scrub every floor in this house. On your knees. By nightfall. The door to his room slammed. Audrey stood in the spreading puddle, her fingers numb, her stomach already cramping with the hollow ache of hunger she knew too well. The cold seeped through her wet clothes and settled into her bones, the same cold that seemed to live permanently inside this house, in her father's eyes, in the spaces between words they never said. She should go to her room. The tiny space under the stairs that wasn't quite a closet but wasn't quite a room either, where she slept on a mat thin enough to feel every board beneath it and kept her few possessions in a crate marked, dry goods. Instead, Audrey moved to the kitchen window and stared out at the dark forest beyond. Somewhere in those trees, between the homestead and the river her father forbade her to approach, she'd seen something. A trail of drops in the snow, too dark to be water, too deliberate to be random. They'd gleamed strangely in the moonlight, almost silver, almost glowing. Almost magical. No such thing, she told herself firmly. Magic was for stories, and this was Hollow Pines, where the only magic was surviving winter and the only mystery was why people stayed in a place so determined to be forgotten by the rest of the world. But the drops had been real. She'd followed them as far as she'd dared before her father's shouts had driven her back. And now, standing in her cold kitchen with punishment waiting and hunger gnawing, Audrey made a decision that would change everything. She would go back. Not because she was brave, she'd never felt brave a day in her life. But because something in that trail had called to her. Something wounded. Something dying. Something that understood what it meant to be alone in the dark, waiting for mercy that never came. Audrey slipped through the kitchen, grabbed the heel of yesterday's bread from the cooling box, and tucked it into her pocket. Her hands found the small knife she used for gathering herbs, the clean cloth she'd hidden after stealing it from the rag pile, the tin of salve she'd made from pine resin and stolen tallow. Her father's snores rattled through the walls. She opened the door. The forest welcomed her like an old friend, or maybe like a predator recognizing prey. Audrey had never been sure which. But she ran anyway, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air, following the silver-black trail that seemed to glow brighter the farther she went from the house. The drops led her down the slope, through the twisted pine trees that gave the kingdom its name, toward the sound of rushing water that meant she was close to the forbidden river. Her father's voice echoed in her mind with every step, ** monsters feed at the river. Stay away from the water. That's where they hunt, *. But Audrey was tired of being afraid of shadows and stories. She pushed through the last line of trees. And stopped. The riverbank spread before her, rocks slick with ice, water rushing past in dark currents that reflected the moon like shattered glass. And there, collapsed on the stones with snow gathering on his midnight fur, was the source of the silver-black trail. A wolf pup. No. Not a pup. Too large for that, easily the size of a full-grown mastiff, but still young, she could tell from the proportions, the way his legs seemed too long for his body, like he hadn't quite grown into himself yet. And he was dying. Audrey could see it in the way his ribs shuddered with each labored breath. In the arrows, silver-tipped, she realized with a chill, that pierced his flank and shoulder. In the deep gashes along his side that leaked blood too dark to be natural. In the way his frost-blue eyes tracked her approach with desperate, fading awareness. Those eyes. They were wrong. All wrong. Too intelligent. Too human. They watched her not like an animal watches a potential threat, but like a person watches their last hope walking toward them through the snow. Audrey knew she should run. Everything in her limited experience with wolves said they were dangerous, unpredictable, deadly. Her father's warnings rang in her ears. The kingdom's superstitions about wolf spirits and cursed beasts whispered at the edges of her thoughts. But she'd also learned something else in her 10 years, the world was cruel to the defenseless. She knew how it felt to be broken and bleeding and alone, waiting for mercy that never came. She knew how it felt to be left to suffer because no one cared enough to risk anything for you. And she was so tired of being part of that cruelty. "Hey," she whispered, kneeling in the snow just out of reach. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's ears flicked toward her voice. His muzzle was scarred, she noticed, like he'd been in fights before. But when he looked at her with those impossible frost-blue eyes, she didn't see violence. She saw pain. Exhaustion. Something that looked heartbreakingly like resignation, like he'd given up hoping anyone would help. She saw herself reflected back. Audrey pulled the bread from her pocket with trembling fingers. "I know you're hurting. I know you're scared. But I have food. And I know how to treat wounds. If you let me help." The wolf made a sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a growl. Something caught between hope and warning, like he wanted to trust her but had learned the hard way that trust was dangerous. "I know that feeling too," Audrey thought. She broke off a piece of bread and held it out. "Please. I know what my father says about your kind. I know the stories. But stories lie, and I—" Her voice cracked. "I can't just leave you here to die. I can't." The wolf stared at her for a long moment. Then, moving with obvious pain, he stretched his neck forward and took the bread from her palm with heartbreaking gentleness, careful not to let his teeth graze her skin, like he was terrified of accidentally hurting her. Something in Audrey's chest cracked open. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay. I'm going to help you. But we have to move. There's an old watermill not far from here, no one goes there anymore. Can you stand?" The wolf tried. His legs shook violently, barely holding his weight, and fresh blood seeped from the arrow wounds. He made it 2 steps before collapsing back onto the stones with a sound of pure agony. Audrey didn't think. She just moved. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands finding the warmest parts of his fur, trying to assess the damage. The arrows would have to come out. The wounds cleaned and bound. He needed shelter, warmth, food, time. "I can't carry you," she said. "You're too heavy. But if you can help me, if you can try to walk while I support you." Those frost-blue eyes met hers again, and Audrey felt something shift in the air between them. A recognition. An understanding. A connection forming in that moment of shared vulnerability, this dying wolf and this neglected girl, both intimately familiar with suffering, both desperate for someone to choose them. The wolf gathered his remaining strength and pushed himself up. Together, they moved through the forest, Audrey supporting as much of his weight as her small frame could manage, the wolf leaning heavily against her, both of them breathing hard, both of them trembling. Blood dripped in a steady trail behind them, marking their path in the snow. "If my father finds out," Audrey thought, "he'll beat me until I can't stand. If the village finds out, they'll call me cursed. If anyone discovers I'm hiding a wolf, But she didn't stop. They reached the watermill just as the moon began to set. The old building hunched against the hillside like a forgotten secret, its will still, its windows broken, its purpose abandoned. Audrey shouldered open the door that hung crooked on its hinges and helped the wolf inside. He collapsed immediately on the rotted floorboards, his breathing rapid and shallow. Audrey knelt beside him, her hands already reaching for the arrows. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "But I have to get them out or you'll die." The wolf's eyes found hers. And then, impossible, it had to be impossible, he dipped his massive head in what looked unmistakably like a nod. Like he understood. Like he was more than any wolf should be. Audrey's hands shook as she gripped the first arrow shaft. "I won't leave you to die," she promised, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Not like everyone else did to me. No one ever chose me. No one ever thought I was worth the risk. But I'm choosing you. Okay? I'm choosing you." She pulled. The wolf's howl split the night. And as Audrey worked to save a dying creature she didn't understand, cleaning wounds that seemed to glow with trapped moonlight, binding injuries with torn cloth and desperate hope, she didn't know she was saving a king. She didn't know she was forging a bond that would tie her soul to his forever. She didn't know she was rewriting the fate of the wolf-blood throne. She only knew that for the first time in her short, brutal life, she was doing something that mattered. She was choosing mercy over cruelty. Kindness over survival. Love over fear. And the dying wolf prince, barely clinging to consciousness, looked at her with those frost-blue eyes and made a vow in the language of his cursed people, a vow she couldn't hear, couldn't understand, couldn't possibly know would bind them together across decades. "You saved me when I was nothing. If I survive this, I will find you again. I will give you everything. And if destiny demands, I will bow to you as my queen." But that night, in the abandoned watermill, there were no crowns. No kingdoms. No prophecies. Just a broken girl and a dying wolf, choosing each other in the dark. The first arrow came out with a wet, tearing sound that made Audrey's stomach turn. The wolf, she couldn't keep thinking of him as the wolf or the pup when those frost-blue eyes watched her with such terrible awareness, went rigid beneath her hands. His breathing stopped for 3 endless heartbeats. Then a shudder ran through his entire body, and a low whine escaped his throat, so full of pain that Audrey had to blink back tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her hands slick with blood that was too dark, too silver-threaded to be natural. I'm sorry, but they have to come out." She worked through the night, extracting 3 more silver-tipped arrows, cleaning wounds that glowed faintly in the darkness, binding everything with strips torn from her own threadbare blanket. The wolf never snapped at her. Never tried to pull away. He just watched her with those impossible eyes and endured, like he understood that pain now meant survival later. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, Audrey could barely keep her eyes open. But the wolf was bandaged, his breathing had steadied, and when she offered him water cupped in her trembling hands, he drank. "I have to go," she said, exhaustion making her voice shake. "My father will wake soon. But I'll come back tonight. I promise." The wolf's ears pricked forward. Something in his gaze shifted, from pain to something that looked almost like hope. Audrey ran home through the pre-dawn darkness, climbed through the cellar window she'd left unlatched, and collapsed onto her thin mat just as her father's heavy footsteps began moving overhead. She got 3 hours of sleep before he woke her to start scrubbing floors. The next night, she brought stolen chicken bones from the cook pot and more clean cloth. The night after that, she snuck dried meat from the smokehouse and a jar of honey she'd been saving for months. Every night for the next week, Audrey became a thief, stealing from her father's meager stores, from the village when she went for supplies, from anywhere she could find food and medicine for a creature who shouldn't be alive. And every night, she watched him heal. It was wrong how fast it happened. On the 3rd night, the wounds had stopped bleeding. On the 5th, they'd begun to close, the edges knitting together with an efficiency that defied everything Audrey knew about healing. By the 7th night, scars had formed where gaping injuries should have been, thick, silver-threaded lines that glowed faintly when moonlight touched them. "You're not normal," Audrey said on the 8th night, running her fingers carefully along the largest scar. "I don't know what you are, but you're not just a wolf." The creature's eyes held hers. If she didn't know better, she'd swear he was agreeing with her. She started talking to him, really talking, not just the reassuring murmurs she'd used while treating his wounds, but actual conversation. She told him about her mother, who died of winter fever when Audrey was 4, leaving only scattered memories of soft hands and lullabies. She told him about her father, how grief had hollowed him out and left something bitter and cold behind. She told him about the loneliness that sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and constant, because in 10 years of life she'd never had anyone who truly saw her, truly cared whether she was happy or hurting or alive. "Everyone treats me like I'm invisible," she whispered on the 10th night, her back against the rough mill wall, the wolf's head resting on her lap. "Or like I'm a burden they have to tolerate. My father looks through me. The villagers cross the street when they see me coming. I think they can tell there's something wrong with me, something that makes me see too much, feel too much. Like I don't quite fit in my own skin." The wolf made a low rumbling sound, not quite a growl. His eyes never left her face. "But you don't look at me like that." Audrey's fingers found the silver streak that ran from between his ears down to his scarred muzzle, wider now that the swelling had gone down, beautiful in a strange way. "Like lightning frozen in midnight fur. You look at me like I matter. Like what I say is important. Like I'm not broken or wrong or too much." She named him that night Ash, for the silver marking that reminded her of moonlight on burned wood, for the way he'd risen from near death like something reborn from destruction. When she said it aloud, "Your name is Ash," the wolf's entire body went still. Then he did something that made Audrey's breath catch. He lowered his massive head and pressed his scarred muzzle into her palm, holding himself there like he was accepting something sacred. Like she'd given him more than a name. Like she'd given him an identity he'd lost or forgotten. The bond between them deepened after that, growing from simple care into something more profound. Ash began anticipating her needs before she voiced them, nudging her toward the driest spot when rain leaked through the broken roof, positioning himself between her and the door when footsteps passed too close to the mill, bringing her things he found in the forest: bright feathers, smooth stones, once a perfect bird's nest lined with moss. "Are you trying to decorate?" Audrey asked with her first genuine laugh in years, holding up the nest. "Or are these gifts?" Ash's tail gave a single, deliberate wag. But what unsettled her most were the moments when his intelligence became impossible to deny. Like the night on day 14 when her father's voice echoed through the forest, angry, searching, calling her name with that sharp edge that meant punishment was coming. Audrey froze in the mill doorway, terror locking her muscles, her mind racing through inadequate excuses. Ash moved faster than thought. He was up and hidden in the mill's deepest shadows before Audrey could even whisper a warning, his massive form pressed flat against the wall, absolutely silent, absolutely still. Not like an animal hiding by instinct, but like someone who understood the danger and knew exactly how to avoid it. Her father never found the mill. And when his footsteps finally faded, Ash emerged from the shadows and came to Audrey, pressing his warm bulk against her trembling body until her heartbeat slowed and the tears stopped falling. "You knew," she breathed into his fur. "You knew what to do. How did you know?" Ash said nothing, couldn't say anything, but his eyes held hers with an expression so human it made her chest ache. The villages began to whisper. Audrey heard fragments when she went to the market: livestock gone missing, strange tracks in the snow, lights moving through the forest at night. The word wolf was spoken with increasing frequency and mounting fear. Her father's warnings intensified, his punishments grew harsher for smaller infractions, and Audrey learned to move through her days like a ghost, silent and careful, counting the hours until she could run to the mill and be with the only living thing who'd ever made her feel whole. On the 17th night, as she sat reading to Ash from a water-damaged book of folk tales she'd found, Audrey looked up to find his shadow cast against the mill wall by moonlight. She went very still. The shadow was wrong. It moved like Ash, his head turning, his ears pricking, but the shape on the wall wasn't entirely wolf. For just a moment, just a heartbeat, the shadow's outline suggested something else. Broader shoulders. A more upright posture. The suggestion of a human form wrapped in wolf's clothing. Audrey blinked, and the shadow was normal again. "I'm going mad," she whispered. But her hands shook as she returned to reading, and Ash watched her with those knowing frost-blue eyes that held secrets she couldn't begin to guess. The nights blurred together, 18, 19, 20. Ash grew stronger, his movements regaining grace and power, his presence filling the mill with a kind of wild majesty that made Audrey's heart race. He was beautiful and terrifying and impossibly gentle all at once, and she'd grown so attached that the thought of him leaving made her feel like she was being hollowed out. "You're almost healed," she said quietly on the 20th night, running her hands along his flanks where the last scars had faded to thin silver lines. "You could leave now. Go back to wherever you came from. Be free." Ash's eyes found hers immediately. He made a sound low in his chest, not quite a whine, not quite a growl, and shifted closer, pressing his forehead against hers with such deliberate intention that Audrey had to close her eyes against the sudden burn of tears. "I don't want you to go," she admitted in a broken whisper. "You're the only good thing I have. The only one who sees me. If you leave, I'll be alone again, and I can't." Ash pulled back, and Audrey opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. Then, moving with slow, ceremonial precision, he backed up 3 steps. His front legs folded. His massive head lowered until his scarred muzzle nearly touched the ground. He was bowing. Not the playful crouch of a dog. Not the submissive posture of a frightened animal. This was formal, deliberate, weighted with meaning Audrey couldn't fully grasp. This was the kind of bow she'd seen in pictures of knights pledging fealty to kings, of subjects showing reverence to those who held power over their lives. "Ash?" Her voice came out barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" He held the position for a long moment, long enough that goosebumps rose on Audrey's arms, long enough that she felt the air between them change, thicken, become charged with something ancient and sacred. Then he rose, crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, and pressed his nose to her chest, right over her rapidly beating heart. Audrey felt it then, a pulse of something that wasn't quite heat, wasn't quite light, but reminded her of both. It spread from where Ash touched her, flowing through her veins like liquid starlight, settling somewhere deep in her chest and taking root. Her breath caught. Her hands flew to where his nose rested, covering the spot, and for a dizzying moment she felt him, not just his presence, but something deeper. His emotions, his intentions, his absolute conviction that she was important, that she mattered, that she was worth protecting. Then it faded, leaving only the warmth of his fur beneath her fingers and the echo of that impossible connection humming in her bones. "What was that?" Audrey breathed. "What did you just do?" Ash stepped back, his frost-blue eyes gleaming in the moonlight, and Audrey would swear on everything she held sacred that he looked satisfied. Like he'd accomplished something significant. Like he'd sealed a promise that transcended words. On the 21st night, she arrived at the mill to find Ash standing at full height for the first time since she'd found him. He was magnificent, easily 7 feet long from nose to tail, with shoulders that came up to her chest, for that gleamed like polished obsidian threaded with silver, and those haunting frost-blue eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. "You're beautiful," Audrey whispered, awed and terrified and heartbroken all at once. "And you're healed. Completely healed." Ash crossed to her and did something he'd never done before, he shifted his body so she could climb onto his back. It took Audrey a moment to understand what he was offering, but when she did, she laughed, the sound high and disbelieving, and carefully positioned herself on his broad back, her fingers tangling in his thick fur. He ran. Through the forest, along the river, through clearings silvered by moonlight, Ash ran like poetry and power combined. Audrey clung to him, the wind whipping her hair, her heart soaring for the first time in her life. This was freedom. This was joy. This was what it felt like to be something more than invisible, more than afraid, more than alone. When they finally stopped, Audrey slid from his back and threw her arms around his neck, pressing her face into his fur while tears she didn't understand streamed down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "For letting me save you. For seeing me. For making me feel like I'm worth something." Ash rumbled deep in his chest, a sound of comfort, of affection, of promises made without words. But on the 23rd night, when Audrey arrived at the mill with bread and dried fruit and stories to tell, she found it empty. Ash was gone. Only a single object remained on the rotted floorboards where he'd slept, a feather unlike any bird she'd ever seen, crescent-shaped and gleaming silver-white, seeming to pulse with trapped moonlight. Audrey picked it up with shaking hands. It was warm. Impossibly, it was warm, like it held a living heartbeat. She waited at the mill every night for 2 weeks, but Ash never returned. Eventually, she had to accept the truth: he'd left. Healed and whole, he'd gone back to wherever creatures like him belonged, leaving her with only a mysterious feather and memories of frost-blue eyes that had seen her, truly seen her, when no one else ever had. Audrey hid the feather in the hollow space beneath a floorboard under her sleeping mat. Some nights she'd take it out and hold it, feeling that impossible warmth, remembering what it felt like to matter to someone. She told herself it had all been real. That Ash had been real. That the connection between them, that pulse of light and feeling, had meant something. But as weeks turned to months and months turned to years, it became easier to let the memory soften into fantasy. A lonely girl's imagination. A fevered dream born of desperation and winter darkness. She kept the feather, though. Hidden and safe. A talisman of the time when a dying wolf had let her be brave, had let her be needed, had let her be enough. She never forgot those frost-blue eyes. And 23 years later, when royal soldiers stormed her village and a towering king with those same impossible eyes knelt before her, Audrey would finally understand: it had all been real. Every moment. Every promise. Every wordless vow. And now he'd come back to claim them. The 24th night, Audrey ran to the mill with her heart lighter than it had been in years. She'd stolen fresh venison from the smokehouse, a risk that could earn her a beating if discovered, but Ash deserved something special. He'd been fully healed for 3 nights now, his strength returned, his movements fluid and powerful. Tonight she wanted to celebrate that. To celebrate him. To celebrate the impossible friendship that had become the only bright point in her colorless life. The mill door hung open. Audrey's steps slowed. Something felt wrong. The air tasted different, emptier somehow, like a space abandoned rather than simply vacant. Her pulse began to hammer as she pushed through the doorway, her eyes scanning the familiar shadows. Ash. Silence answered her. Not the comfortable quiet of a sleeping wolf, but the profound stillness of absence. He was gone. Audrey's chest constricted. She moved deeper into the mill, searching the corners where he liked to rest, checking the back room where she'd first laid him down bleeding and broken. Nothing. No massive form curled in shadow. No frost-blue eyes gleaming in the darkness. No warm presence that had made this decaying building feel more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Ash. Her voice cracked. She spun in a circle, panic rising like floodwater. Where are you? This isn't funny, please, just. Her boot struck something on the floor. Audrey looked down and froze. In the exact center of where Ash had slept lay a single feather. But calling it a feather felt inadequate, like calling a diamond a rock. It was crescent-shaped, longer than her hand, and seemed carved from concentrated moonlight. Silver-white with an iridescent quality that made it shimmer even in the mill's gloom, it pulsed faintly with its own inner luminescence, like a heartbeat made visible. Audrey dropped to her knees and picked it up with trembling fingers. It was warm. Impossibly warm, like it had just fallen from living flesh. But no bird she'd ever seen or heard of had feathers this shape, this color, this size. And certainly no wolf should possess something like this. The truth she'd been avoiding for 23 nights crashed over her: Ash had never been just a wolf. The intelligence in his eyes, the unnatural healing, the shadows that sometimes looked too human, the ceremonial bow, that pulse of connection that had rooted itself in her chest, all of it pointed to something beyond her understanding. Something magical. Something impossible. And now he was gone. "No," Audrey whispered, clutching the feather to her chest. "No, you can't just leave. You can't. I saved you. I chose you. You bowed to me." What did that mean? What did any of it mean? The empty mill offered no answers. She waited there until dawn threatened the horizon, the venison growing cold in her satchel, hope dying by degrees. Maybe he'd gone hunting. Maybe he'd return tomorrow. Maybe she hadn't lost the only thing that had ever made her feel valuable. But deep down, she knew. The feather was a goodbye. A token left for the girl who'd saved his life, beautiful and inexplicable and final. Audrey stumbled home as the sun rose, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. The next night she returned to the mill. And the night after that. And the night after that. For 2 weeks she kept her vigil, sitting in the space where Ash had lain, the feather clutched in her hands, waiting for frost-blue eyes to appear in the darkness. He never came. Her father noticed her exhaustion, the way she moved through days like a ghost haunting her own life. His questions grew sharper, his scrutiny more intense. Where was she going at night? Why did she look so gaunt? What was she hiding? Nothing, Audrey lied, and the word tasted like ash on her tongue. "I'm not hiding anything." But Marcus Reyes wasn't a fool. On the 15th night after Ash's disappearance, he followed her. Audrey didn't realize until she was halfway to the mill, until she heard the heavy crunch of boots on snow behind her and turned to find her father's dark silhouette blocking her path back home. "So this is where you've been sneaking off to?" His voice was cold as the winter air. "An abandoned mill. Meeting someone, are you? Some village boy?" "No, I. Don't lie to me." He crossed the distance between them in 4 strides, his hand shooting out to grip her arm hard enough to bruise. "I'm sick of your deception. Sick of your secrets. You think I don't see you stealing food? You think I'm blind?" Fear spiked through Audrey's chest. If he searched her, he'd find the feather. If he found the feather, strange, unnatural, glowing, he'd ask questions she couldn't answer. He'd call her cursed. Demon-touched. He'd lock her in the cellar or worse, send her away to the church-run asylums where they kept people who saw things that shouldn't exist. "I was feeding a stray cat," she blurted, the lie spilling out in desperate tumbles. "Just a cat. It was sick, and I was trying to help it, but it died. I'm sorry. I won't do it again." Marcus stared at her for a long, terrible moment. Then his hand cracked across her face. Audrey's head snapped sideways, pain exploding across her cheek. She tasted blood. "If I catch you sneaking out again," her father said, his voice deadly quiet, "I'll bar your door from the outside. You'll learn obedience one way or another." He released her and walked away, leaving Audrey standing in the snow with her face throbbing and the feather hidden in her pocket, its warmth the only comfort in a world gone cold again. She stopped going to the mill after that. The risk was too great, and Ash clearly wasn't coming back. But she kept the feather, hiding it in the hollow space beneath a loose floorboard under her sleeping mat, the same place she'd once hidden her mother's locket before her father sold it for whiskey money. Some nights, when the loneliness became unbearable, Audrey would take out the feather and hold it. The warmth never faded. The gentle pulse continued, steady as a heartbeat, like whatever magic had created it refused to die. She'd close her eyes and remember, the weight of Ash's head on her lap, the rumble of contentment in his chest, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth the entire world. And she'd dream. Strange, vivid dreams that felt more like memories than imagination. Dreams where she ran through moonlit forests on 4 legs instead of 2. Dreams where she understood a language that had no words, only feelings and intentions communicated through scent and sound and the subtle shifts of bodies moving in tandem. Dreams where frost-blue eyes watched her from impossible distances, seeing her across miles and years, never forgetting, never releasing whatever connection had formed in that mill during 23 nights of secrets. She'd wake gasping, the feather warm in her hand, her chest aching with loss and longing. "What did you do to me?" she whispered to the darkness, to the memory of a wolf who'd been more than a wolf. "Why can't I forget you?" But the years passed as they do, and Audrey learned to bury the ache beneath the daily rituals of survival. She grew from a girl into a young woman, eventually escaping her father's house when she turned 16, running away to a neighboring village where no one knew her, where she could build a small life as an herbalist and healer, where the bruises finally faded and the hunger finally stopped. She built walls around the memories. Convinced herself it had been a fever dream, a lonely child's desperate fantasy. Real wolves didn't heal that fast. Real wolves didn't have glowing scars or shadows that looked human or eyes that held impossible intelligence. Real wolves didn't leave magical feathers behind. It had been imagination. It had to be. Because the alternative, that she'd saved something ancient and powerful, that she'd formed a connection with a creature beyond understanding, that she'd been abandoned by the only being who'd ever truly seen her, was too painful to accept. So Audrey told herself stories. Safe stories. Normal stories. Stories where she'd never found anything more mysterious than a sick animal, where the feather was just an unusual bird's plume she'd found in the forest, where the dreams were only her mind playing tricks. But she never threw the feather away. And she never stopped dreaming of frost-blue eyes watching her through the darkness, patient and unwavering, waiting for the day when promises made in silence could finally be spoken aloud. 23 years after she'd saved a dying wolf by a forbidden river, those eyes would find her again. And Audrey Reyes would learn that some bonds, once forged, could never be broken, no matter how many years passed, no matter how many lies you told yourself, no matter how far you ran from the impossible. Some debts demanded to be repaid. Some promises refused to die. And some wolves grew up to be kings. Audrey Reyes had learned to be invisible again, but this time by choice. At 33, she'd built a life in the village of Thornhaven that suited her perfectly, small, quiet, unremarkable. Her cottage sat at the edge of the forest where she could gather herbs without interference. Her patients paid in eggs and vegetables and occasionally coin. Her neighbors knew her as the healer woman who asked few questions and expected fewer in return. She liked it that way. Invisibility meant safety. It meant no one looked too closely at the scars on her forearms or the shadows in her eyes or the way she sometimes stared at nothing, seeing memories no one else could share. The feather remained hidden beneath a loose stone in her hearth. She hadn't looked at it in months. The dreams had faded to occasional whispers, frost-blue eyes in darkness, the phantom sensation of warm fur beneath her fingers, a bone-deep certainty that somewhere, something was watching over her. Childish fantasies, she told herself. Nothing more. That morning started like any other. Audrey woke before dawn, prepared tinctures for old Mara's joint pain, ground willow bark for the blacksmith's headaches, and hung bundles of lavender to dry from her rafters. The autumn air carried the promise of early frost. She'd need to harvest the last of her medicinal plants before winter set in. She was measuring feverfew into small pouches when the first scream split the morning quiet. Audrey's hands stilled. Through her window, she saw people running toward the village square, their faces twisted with confusion and fear. The bell in the church tower began to ring, not the measured tolls of daily prayer, but the frantic clanging that meant danger. Her heart kicked against her ribs. Bandits? Fire? Sickness? She grabbed her shawl and joined the flood of villagers converging on the square, her healer's instincts already cataloging supplies she might need. But as she rounded the corner and saw what had caused the panic, her feet rooted to the cobblestones. Soldiers. Dozens of them, mounted on warhorses that gleamed like polished stone, their armor etched with a crest that made Audrey's breath catch, a wolf's head split by a crescent moon, rendered in silver against obsidian black. They'd formed a perimeter around the square, cutting off every exit. Villagers clustered together like frightened sheep, children pressed against their mothers' legs, men gripping tools that would be useless against trained warriors. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "Is it a raid? Why would the royal army come here?" Audrey pushed closer, her pulse hammering. Something about those wolf crests pulled at her, familiar in a way that made her stomach clench with a feeling she couldn't name. She found herself scanning the soldiers' faces, searching for something, though she didn't know what. Then the crowd parted. A figure emerged from between the mounted warriors, so tall he seemed to dwarf the horses, so broad that armor did nothing to diminish his presence. His cloak billowed behind him, black silk lined with silver thread that caught the morning light and threw it back like captured stars. The wolf head crest blazed across his chest plate, larger than those worn by his soldiers, ornate and unmistakable. But it was his face that stopped Audrey's heart. Sharp features carved from granite and shadow. Dark hair that fell past his shoulders with a streak of silver running through it. A mouth set in a grim line that suggested he smiled rarely and forgave even less. And his eyes. Frost blue. Impossibly bright against his tanned skin. Eyes that had haunted her dreams for 23 years. No. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. The man's gaze swept across the assembled villagers with predatory focus. People flinched away from that stare, instinctively recognizing something dangerous in it, something that set every prey instinct screaming. Then his eyes found Audrey. And stopped. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Audrey felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, pinning her in place, stripping away the careful invisibility she'd cultivated. Those frost-blue eyes widened fractionally, the only break in his otherwise stone-still expression, and something flickered across his face that looked almost like relief. Like recognition. Like coming home after a long journey. "No," Audrey whispered, but the word had no sound. The man moved. He crossed the square in long, deliberate strides, his cloak sweeping behind him, soldiers instinctively moving out of his path. The crowd scattered before him like leaves before wind, pressing back to give him room, but Audrey couldn't move. Her feet had forgotten how. Her entire body had locked in place, shock and disbelief and impossible hope warring in her chest. He stopped 3 paces away. Up close, he was overwhelming. Easily 6.5 feet tall, built like violence wrapped in ceremony, wearing power the way other men wore clothes, naturally, inevitably, as if he'd been born to it. Scars marked his hands where they rested on his sword belt. More scars traced his neck, disappearing beneath his armor. Silver-threaded scars that gleamed faintly in the morning light. Just like the scars she remembered on Midnight Fur. "It can't be," Audrey breathed. "You can't be." The man's expression shifted. Something cracked in that granite facade, a softening around his eyes, a barely perceptible easing of tension in his shoulders. And then, moving with the kind of deliberate grace that suggested every gesture was a choice, he dropped to one knee. The square erupted in gasps. Soldiers stiffened in shock. Villagers cried out in confusion. Someone behind Audrey made a strangled sound of disbelief because men like this, men who radiated authority like heat from a forge, didn't kneel. Certainly not in the middle of a village square. Certainly not before a nobody healer woman in a threadbare dress with dirt under her fingernails. But he knelt anyway, his right fist pressed over the wolf head crest on his chest, his frost-blue eyes never leaving Audrey's face. "My savior." His voice was deep, roughened by command and something else, something that sounded like carefully controlled emotion. "I have found you at last." The words hit Audrey like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, but she locked them, refusing to fall. Refusing to break down in front of all these watching eyes even as her entire understanding of reality shattered around her. "Who?" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "Who are you?" A slight tightening around his mouth suggested the question pained him, but he answered clearly, formally, like he was reciting an oath. "I am King Tacket Harris, sovereign of the Wolf Blood territories, guardian of the lunar throne, last of the cursed line." He paused, and something almost vulnerable flickered across his face. "But you knew me by another name, once. A name you gave me in an abandoned mill, 23 years ago, when I was dying and you chose mercy over fear." No. No, it wasn't possible. Wolves didn't become men. Dying pups didn't grow into kings. Those frost-blue eyes couldn't belong to Ash, Audrey whispered. And she watched King Tacket Harris, this impossibly powerful, terrifying man, close his eyes like hearing his true name from her lips was a benediction he'd been waiting decades to receive. "Yes," he said, opening his eyes, and the raw emotion in that single word made Audrey's chest constrict. "I was Ash. The wolf pup you found bleeding by the forbidden river. The creature you hid and healed and saved when anyone else would have left me to die." His hand moved to his chest, pressing harder against the crest. "You reversed the curse that should have killed me. You bound your life to mine in ways neither of us understood. And I have spent 23 years rebuilding a kingdom strong enough to deserve the girl who gave me a second chance at living." The village square had gone utterly silent. Every eye watched the scene unfolding, the kneeling king and the healer woman staring at each other like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Audrey's mind reeled. She catalogued details with the same clinical precision she used when treating wounds, the silver streak in his hair matching the marking she remembered on a wolf's head. The scars on his hands matching the placement of arrow wounds she'd treated. The way he held himself with a predator's awareness, like he was constantly tracking movement and threat. The way he looked at her like she was the only fixed point in a spinning world. "This isn't real," she said, more to herself than to him. "I'm dreaming. Or I've finally gone mad like my father always said I would." "You're not mad." Tackett's voice gentled, losing some of its formal edge. "And this is very real, Audrey Reyes. I never forgot you. I never stopped watching over you. And now I've come to fulfill the vow I made the night you named me." "What vow?" "You were a wolf. You couldn't speak. I bowed to you." His frost-blue eyes burned with intensity. "On the 20th night, when you told me you didn't want me to leave. I bowed because in my people's tradition, a wolf blood heir only bows to those they've chosen to serve. Those they would die to protect. Those they recognize as worthy of absolute loyalty." Audrey's hand went to her chest, to the spot where she'd felt that pulse of connection all those years ago. "I felt something. When you touched me right here. The soul mark." Tackett's expression grew fierce, protective. "An ancient bond between wolf blood and life anchor. It tied us together, Audrey. Your life to mine. My strength to your will. And it's why I've come back, because the bond never broke, and the kingdom now faces a threat that requires both of us to survive. This was too much. Too impossible." Audrey's careful, quiet life was crumbling around her, and she needed. "I don't understand any of this," she said, hating how her voice shook. "Why are you here? Why now?" Tacket rose in one fluid motion, towering over her again, but keeping a careful distance like he was afraid she'd bolt. Because the corrupted wolf-born clans have risen. Because civil war threatens to tear apart everything I've built. Because without you, without the one person I'm soul-bound to, I cannot hold the throne or protect my people. His jaw tightened. And because I have waited 23 years to see you again, to repay the debt I owe, to give you the life you deserve instead of the suffering you endured. The village remained frozen, every person transfixed by the impossible scene. Audrey felt their stares like weights, pressing down, suffocating. This moment was rewriting her entire existence. The wolf she'd saved had become a king, the connection she'd thought was fantasy was apparently a sacred bond, and now this man was claiming she was somehow essential to the survival of a kingdom she'd never even heard of. I can't, Audrey whispered. I'm nobody. Just a healer. You've made a mistake. No mistake. Tackett's hand moved slowly, carefully, like he was approaching a frightened animal. He pulled something from beneath his armor, a chain, she realized, hanging around his neck. And suspended from that chain was a crescent-shaped feather, gleaming silver-white even in daylight. The feather. The one she'd hidden in her hearth. But that was impossible. I left you one, Tackett said quietly, reading her confusion. But I kept the other. As a reminder of the girl who chose mercy when the world had taught her only cruelty. As a promise that I would return. Audrey stared at the feather, then at the man holding it, then at the soldiers surrounding them with their wolf-head crests, and felt something inside her chest crack open, the walls she'd built around those memories, the protective numbness she'd cultivated, the forced belief that it had all been imagination. It was real. All of it. The wolf, the bond, the impossible connection that had haunted her dreams. And now the wolf had returned as a king, kneeling before her in front of an entire village, calling her his savior. The world didn't tilt. It shattered completely. Audrey's knees finally gave out. She would have hit the cobblestones if Tackett hadn't moved, faster than anything that large should move, catching her before she fell, his arms careful, reverent, like he was holding something infinitely precious. I have you, he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. I won't let you fall. Not now. Not ever again. And as Audrey stared up into frost-blue eyes she'd never forgotten, surrounded by silent villagers and watching soldiers, she finally understood, her small, quiet, invisible life was over. Whether she was ready or not, destiny had found her again. Tackett carried Audrey to the inn, the only building in Thornhaven large enough to accommodate his presence, and the crowd parted like water before a ship's prow. No one dared speak. No one dared question why their king held a village healer like she was made of spun glass and starlight. He set her down gently in the inn's private room, then turned to his captain. Clear the building. Post guards at every entrance. No one enters without my permission. Your Majesty. Now, Marcus. The soldier's jaw tightened, but he bowed and withdrew. Within moments, Audrey heard the sounds of people being ushered out, protests silenced by the weight of royal authority. Then silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fire and her own rapid breathing. Tackett stood with his back to her, his shoulders rigid beneath armor and silk. Now that they were alone, some of that controlled composure seemed to crack. His hand came up to grip the back of his neck, a gesture so achingly familiar that Audrey's breath caught. She'd seen Ash do the same thing, in wolf form, when he was agitated or uncertain. I know this is overwhelming, he said finally, still not turning. I know I've disrupted your life without warning. But please, let me explain before you run. I'm not going to run. Audrey's voice came out steadier than she felt. I deserve answers. Real ones. Starting with how a wolf becomes a man. Tackett turned then, and the raw vulnerability in his face made her chest ache. I was always a man, Audrey. The wolf was the curse, not my true form. He moved to the chair across from her, slowly, carefully, like sudden movements might spook her, and sat. Without the armor's bulk dominating the space, she could see him more clearly, the sharp intelligence in those frost-blue eyes, the weight of exhaustion carved into his features, the controlled tension of someone who'd learned to carry burdens too heavy for one person. "I'll start at the beginning," he said. 23 years ago, I was 10 years old, the only son of King Aldrich Harris and heir to the Wolf-blood throne. Our people are an ancient bloodline, cursed and blessed in equal measure. We can shift between human and wolf, drawing power from the moon, living longer than ordinary men. But that power made us targets. Audrey listened, her hands gripping the armrests, as Tackett's voice took on the cadence of old grief. A faction of nobles, men who feared our power and coveted our lands, hired assassins. They came during the new moon when we're weakest. They slaughtered my family in their beds. My mother. My father. My younger sister. His hands clenched into fists. They used silver-tipped weapons because silver burns us, poisons us. And they cast a death curse, blood magic designed to trap me in wolf form and slowly drain my life until nothing remained. The arrows, Audrey whispered. The wounds that glowed. Yes. The curse was killing me, cell by cell, moment by moment. I ran as far as I could before the poison brought me down. His eyes found hers. I collapsed by that river prepared to die. And then I heard footsteps. Smelled fear and determination. Looked up to see a small girl with dirt on her face and bruises on her arms, staring at me like I was worth saving. The memory crashed over Audrey, snow and blood and those terrible, aware eyes watching her approach. I wanted to warn you away, Tackett continued. You were so small, and I was so dangerous. The curse made me unpredictable. One wrong move and I could have hurt you. But you didn't run. You knelt in the snow and offered me bread. His voice roughened. No one had shown me kindness in weeks. The world had become nothing but pain and betrayal and waiting to die. And then you said. I won't leave you to die, Audrey finished. Not like everyone else did to me. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. And I felt something break in my chest. The curse recognized your intention, pure compassion without expectation of reward. That kind of selfless mercy is powerful, Audrey. More powerful than most magic. It created a crack in the death curse, just enough to keep me alive through that first night. The soul mark, Audrey said, her hand moving unconsciously to her chest. Tackett nodded. An ancient bond, nearly extinct by my time. When a wolf blood recognizes someone as essential to their survival, not just physically, but spiritually, a connection forms. Your life anchors theirs. Your will can temper their rage. Your presence strengthens them in ways no weapon or spell can match. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. You became my life anchor the moment you chose to save me. And I became bound to you in ways that transcend loyalty or gratitude. Audrey's mind reeled. I felt something. That night you bowed. A pulse of light and warmth. The bond settling into place. Tackett's expression softened. I should have tried harder to make you understand, but I was still trapped in wolf form, still healing, still terrified that if I stayed too long, the assassins would track me to you. So I left the feather, the only part of me that could shift separately, a marker of wolf blood royalty, and I disappeared to keep you safe. Safe, Audrey repeated bitterly. I thought you abandoned me. I thought I'd imagined everything. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Pain flickered across Tackett's face. I know. I watched it happen. Audrey went very still. What? I couldn't stay away completely. The bond wouldn't let me. He stood, Began pacing like energy had to go somewhere or it would consume him. I sent scouts to watch over you. Anonymous gifts, coins left where you'd find them, food forgotten where you walked, dangerous people who threatened you suddenly deciding to move to other villages. The pieces clicked into place. The merchant who tried to assault me when I was 17. He left town the next day. He left with 3 broken ribs and a warning that if he ever came near you again, he'd lose more than ribs. Tackett's voice held an edge of satisfaction. You were mine to protect, Audrey. Even if you didn't know it. Even if I couldn't be there in person. You had no right. I had every right. The words came out more forcefully than he seemed to intend. He stopped, closed his eyes, visibly reining himself in. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled but no less intense. The bond works both ways. I feel your fear, your pain, your loneliness like they're my own. Every time you went to bed hungry, I felt it. Every time your father hurt you, I wanted to tear him apart. Do you understand? You weren't just some girl I felt grateful to. You are, essential. And I couldn't claim you, couldn't bring you into my world, until I'd rebuilt a kingdom strong enough to keep you safe. Audrey stood on shaking legs. This is insane. You're telling me my entire life has been influenced by a bond one never agreed to, by a wolf king playing guardian angel from the shadows, and now you want, what? For me to just accept this? I want you to come with me to the capital. Tackett's jaw tightened. The corrupted wolf-born clans are rising. They're hunting anyone with pure wolf blood lineage, trying to destroy the throne from within. And they know about you, Audrey. They know you're my life anchor. Which makes you a target. Then break the bond. Audrey's voice cracked. I didn't ask for this. I don't want to be your anchor or your responsibility or whatever this is. Just, let me go back to my quiet life. I can't. The words held infinite regret. Breaking a soulmark bond would kill us both. The magic is too deeply rooted. And even if it weren't, he crossed to her in 2 strides, stopping just short of touching. Even if I could let you go, I wouldn't. Not when you're in danger. Not when I've spent 23 years preparing to give you everything you deserved and never received. I don't want everything, Audrey said, tears burning her eyes. I just want choice. I want. The window exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor as something massive and wrong hurtled through. Not quite wolf, not quite human, a twisted amalgamation of both, its fur matted and reeking, its eyes burning red instead of the clear blue Audrey remembered. Corruption leaked from its wounds like black oil, and when it snarled, the sound held no intelligence, only hunger and rage. Audrey screamed. Tackett moved. One moment he was standing beside her. The next, he'd shifted, not completely, but enough. His body expanded, muscles rippling beneath suddenly fur-covered skin, his face elongating, claws erupting from his fingertips. He was still partially human but undeniably wolf, a perfect fusion that radiated power. He hit the corrupted wolf-born with the force of an avalanche. They went down in a tangle of snapping jaws and tearing claws. Blood sprayed across the walls, black from the corrupted creature, red from Tackett. The floor shook with the impact of their struggle. Furniture splintered. The corrupted wolf-born fought with mindless ferocity, but Tackett fought with precision and brutal efficiency. It was over in seconds. Tackett's jaws closed around the corrupted creature's throat. One violent shake, and the thing went limp, its body already dissolving into oily shadows that evaporated like smoke. Audrey stood frozen, her back pressed against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Tackett shifted back to fully human form, a process that looked both agonizing and natural, and turned to her. Blood streaked his face and chest. His eyes still held that wolf light, fierce and protective. "That," he said, his voice rough, "is what's hunting you. Corrupted wolf-born who've lost their humanity to blood magic and madness. They'll keep coming, Audrey. And they won't stop until they've used you to destroy me or killed you trying." Audrey stared at the dissolving corpse, then at the man who'd just saved her life with violence she'd only seen in nightmares. "How many are there?" she whispered. "Dozens. Maybe more." Tackett approached slowly, his hands raised like he was gentling a spooked horse. "I can protect you. My soldiers can protect you. But only if you come with me. Only if you trust that everything I'm doing is to keep you safe." "Trust," Audrey repeated numbly. "You want me to trust a man I haven't seen in 23 years? A king I don't know? A wolf who? I'm the same wolf you saved." Tackett's voice gentled. "The same one who listened to your stories and kept you warm and bowed to you because even then, I knew you were worth serving. I'm just wearing a different skin now." Audrey looked into those frost-blue eyes, the only constant between the dying pup and the warrior king, and felt something inside her shift. Terror, yes. Confusion, absolutely. But also recognition. The bond hummed between them, that same warmth she'd felt 23 years ago, grown stronger with time and distance. "If I come with you," she said carefully, "I want answers. All of them. I want to understand this bond, this throne, these enemies. And I want," her voice hardened. "I want the right to leave if I choose. I won't be a prisoner in a gilded cage." Tackett's expression eased fractionally. "You'll never be a prisoner. You'll be," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You'll be whatever you choose to be. Advisor. Healer. Friend." His eyes held hers. "Or perhaps, if destiny allows, something more." Outside, soldiers were shouting. More corrupted wolf-born, or just cleanup, Audrey couldn't tell. She looked at the broken window. At the blood on the walls. At the king standing before her, offering protection and chaos in equal measure. Then she thought of her quiet cottage. Her herbs drying in the rafters. Her simple, invisible life. "All right," Audrey said. "I'll come with you." Tackett's relief was palpable. "Thank you." "But Tackett?" She met his gaze steadily. "If you've been watching me for 23 years, then you know I don't break easily. Don't expect me to just fall in line because you're a king. I saved your life once. That doesn't mean I owe you the rest of mine." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen. "I wouldn't expect anything less from the girl brave enough to save a dying wolf." The capital city of Lunhaven rose from the mountainside like a predator's jaw, all sharp spires and dark stone, crowned by a palace that seemed carved from obsidian and moonlight. Audrey pressed her face to the carriage window, equal parts awed and terrified as they climbed the winding road toward those imposing gates. She'd spent 3 days traveling in relative silence. Tackett rode alongside her carriage on a warhorse as black as midnight, surrounded by soldiers whose eyes never stopped scanning the forests for threats. They'd been attacked twice more, corrupted wolf-born emerging from shadows with red eyes and mindless hunger. Each time, Tackett had dispatched them with brutal efficiency while Audrey cowered inside reinforced walls, hating her helplessness. Now, as the palace loomed closer, that helplessness transformed into something sharper. Dread. "You'll be safe here," Tackett had promised that morning. But safety and comfort were different things, and Audrey was beginning to understand she'd traded one prison for another, this one just had better furnishings. The carriage rolled through gates guarded by soldiers in wolf-crested armor, across courtyards paved with stones that gleamed like captured starlight, past fountains where water sang in the afternoon sun. Servants in silver livery paused to stare. Nobles in fine silks whispered behind jeweled hands. Everyone watched the carriage that carried their king's mysterious passenger with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation to barely concealed hostility. Audrey's hands twisted in her simple travel dress. She'd never felt more out of place in her life. The carriage stopped before a massive entrance flanked by columns carved to resemble wolves mid-leap. Tackett dismounted and opened her door himself, a gesture that made nearby nobles exchange significant glances. "The council is waiting," he said quietly, offering his hand. "They're not happy about the secrecy of your arrival. I need you to trust me through what comes next." Audrey took his hand because she had no choice, but her voice was sharp. "What comes next? What aren't you telling me?" "Everything." His frost-blue eyes held apology and determination in equal measure. "But it's better they hear it from me, in front of everyone, so there can be no doubt about your importance." That sounded ominous. "Tackett. Trust me. Please." He led her through corridors that made her cottage look like a shepherd's hovel, soaring ceilings painted with constellations, floors of polished marble that reflected their images like dark water, tapestries depicting wolves and battles and crowns wreathed in moonlight. Servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed. Guards saluted with fists over hearts. They reached a set of silver doors engraved with the wolf head crest. Beyond them, Audrey heard voices, many voices, raised in argument. Tackett paused, his hand on the door. "No matter what they say, remember, you are under my protection. Always." Then he pushed the doors open, and they entered hell disguised as a throne room. The space was enormous, dominated by a throne of twisted silver that seemed to grow from the floor like a frozen tree. But Audrey barely noticed the grandeur because her attention locked on the people assembled before it, 24 nobles in elaborate dress, their faces ranging from young to ancient, all wearing expressions of barely restrained fury. The conversation died the moment Tackett entered. "Your Majesty." A woman with silver-threaded hair and eyes like chips of ice stepped forward. Everything about her screamed power and barely concealed contempt. "You've finally decided to grace us with an explanation for your unprecedented absence." "Lady Morgana." Tackett's voice held no warmth. "I informed you I was retrieving something essential to the throne's stability. You informed us of nothing." An older man with a scar bisecting his face moved to flank Morgana. "You disappeared for a week, returned with a village nobody, and have refused all questions. The council demands answers." Audrey felt their stares like physical touches, assessing, dismissing, calculating her worth and finding her wanting. Her spine straightened. She'd survived worse than noble disdain. Tackett guided her forward until they stood before the assembled council. His hand remained on her elbow, protective, possessive, defiant. "Lords and ladies of the Wolf Blood Court," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "I present to you Audrey Reyes. 23 years ago, she saved my life when I was dying from a curse wound. In doing so, she forged a soul-marked bond with me, a connection that makes her essential to both my survival and the throne's continued stability." The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then chaos erupted. "Soulmark?" Morgana's voice cut through the outrage like a blade. "Those bonds are extinct. Ancient mythology, not. I don't care what the histories say." A younger noble with wolf-gold eyes stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "You expect us to believe this common woman is bound to our king? That she holds power over the wolf-blood throne? She holds no power." Tackett's voice dropped to something dangerous. "The bond links our life forces. It doesn't grant her authority over me." "Then break it." The scarred man's demand rang out clear. "If she's merely a liability, sever the connection and send her away. We cannot have the king's survival dependent on some village healer who knows nothing of court politics or wolf-born threats." Audrey's chest tightened. They were talking about her like she was an object. A problem to be solved. The bond cannot be broken without killing us both, Tackett said flatly. And I would not break it even if I could. Audrey saved my life when she was 10 years old, at great personal risk. She showed me mercy when the world had shown me only violence. I will not repay that debt by casting her aside because you find her origins inconvenient. Inconvenient? Morgana laughed, cold and sharp. Your Majesty, she's a vulnerability we cannot afford. What if enemies capture her? Use her against you? What if she's already been compromised? We know nothing about this woman except that she appeared in your life at a suspiciously convenient moment. The accusation hit Audrey like a slap. I didn't ask for any of this. I was content with my life before he elevated you beyond your station. Another noble interrupted, his sneer evident. Before he gave you access to power and wealth you could never have earned. Enough. Tackett's word cracked like a whip. Power rolled off him in waves, not fully human anymore, his wolf bleeding through in the glow of his eyes, the slight elongation of his canines. Audrey is under my personal protection. Any threat against her is a threat against the throne itself. Then test her. Morgana's eyes gleamed with malice disguised as reason. If she's truly uncorrupted, if this bond is genuine, she should be able to prove it. Subject her to the silver trials. Let the ancient magic judge her worth. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the council. Audrey's pulse hammered. She had no idea what silver trials meant, but the satisfaction in Morgana's expression suggested nothing pleasant. The trials are dangerous, Tackett said, his voice tight. They could kill her. Then perhaps the bond isn't as essential as you claim. The scarred man's challenge hung in the air. If she's truly your life anchor, she'll survive. If not, well, better we discover her weakness now than during an actual crisis. Audrey felt something inside her snap. She'd been talked over, dismissed, threatened, and judged by people who knew nothing about her, nothing about the bruises and hunger and loneliness that had shaped her, nothing about the courage it took to save a dying wolf when you'd been taught your whole life that mercy made you weak. I'll take your test. The words came out before she could stop them. Tackett's hand tightened on her elbow in warning, but Audrey pulled away, stepping forward to face the council alone. I didn't ask to be brought here, she continued, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. I didn't ask for this bond or this responsibility. But I'm not a coward, and I'm not weak. So if you want to test me, test me. Just know that whatever happens, I survived 10 years with a father who treated me like garbage and built a life from nothing. I'm not afraid of your trials or your contempt. Silence fell again, but this time it held a different quality. Several nobles looked taken aback. A few showed grudging respect. Morgana's expression darkened. And Tackett was staring at her with something that looked like awe and terror combined. The trials will be held tomorrow at dawn, Morgana announced, seizing control. Until then, the girl should be confined to quarters. Under guard. For her own protection, of course. She stays in the royal wing. Tackett's voice brooked no argument. In rooms adjacent to mine. And the guards will be there to protect her, not imprison her. How convenient, someone muttered. Others smirked. The implications hit Audrey like cold water. They all thought she and Tackett were. This council is dismissed, Tackett said sharply. We reconvene tomorrow after the trials. And know this, his gaze swept across every face. Audrey Reyes is not a prisoner. She is not a threat. She is essential to this throne's survival, and anyone who threatens her answers to me personally. He didn't wait for responses. His hand found Audrey's elbow again, and he guided her out of the throne room while hostile stares burned into her back. The moment the doors closed behind them, Audrey's legs nearly gave out. Tackett steadied her, his expression tight with fury and worry. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought if I announced it publicly, they'd have to accept. They want me dead." Audrey's voice shook. "Or at least gone. Your Lady Morgana looked like she wanted to rip my throat out with her teeth. Morgana has wanted the throne since before I took it." Tackett's jaw clenched. "She sees you as an obstacle to her influence. But she won't touch you. I swear it." "You can't promise that." Audrey pulled away from him, suddenly needing space, needing air. "I'm a liability to you. They're right about that. What if enemies do capture me? Use me against you? What if?" She stopped, gasping, because something was happening. The bond, quiet since they'd entered the palace, suddenly flared to life. Warmth spread through her chest, and with it came sensations that weren't hers: Tackett's fierce protectiveness, his guilt, his fear for her safety, his barely restrained rage at his counsel's treatment of her. But there was more. She could feel others too, the malice radiating from behind closed doors, the scheming thoughts of nobles who saw her as a pawn to be moved or removed, and something darker. Something corrupted. Audrey spun toward a side corridor. "There's something wrong down there." Something, she couldn't explain how she knew, but the knowledge was absolute. Corrupted. Like those wolf-born that attacked us. Tackett went rigid. He gestured, and guards appeared from shadows. "Search the east wing. Now." They returned minutes later dragging a struggling servant whose eyes burned red beneath glamour. The corruption was obvious once you knew to look: the wrong-colored veins, the oily sheen to his skin, the mindless hunger barely contained beneath a human mask. The guard subdued him quickly, but Audrey stood frozen, staring. "How did you know?" Tackett asked quietly. "I felt it." Audrey's hands trembled. "The bond, it's showing me things. Letting me sense what's hidden. The life anchor ability awakening." Tackett's expression held wonder and worry. "You're beginning to see the world as I do. To sense corruption, deception, truth." He stepped closer. "This is why you're essential, Audrey. Not just because we're bound, but because you can identify threats I might miss. You can see what others hide." Audrey looked at the corrupted servant being dragged away, then at the palace stretching around them, beautiful and deadly, full of people who smiled with poisoned intentions. "I don't want this power," she whispered. "I don't want any of this. I know." Tackett's voice held infinite sadness. "But the bond doesn't ask permission. And tomorrow, when you face the trials, it may be the only thing that keeps you alive." He led her to rooms so opulent they made her want to cry, silk sheets and marble baths and windows overlooking the city like she was worthy of claiming any of it. But all Audrey felt was the weight of invisible chains settling around her shoulders. She'd saved a dying wolf out of compassion. And somehow, that single act of kindness had trapped her in a gilded cage where everyone wanted her dead or controlled, where her childhood mercy had become a political weapon, where the bond that should have been beautiful felt like a sentence she couldn't escape. Tackett paused at her door. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll be there. I won't let them hurt you. You can't stop them." Audrey met his eyes. "Not without looking weak before your counsel. Not without proving that I'm exactly the liability they think I am." His silence confirmed her suspicion. Audrey closed the door between them and sank onto silk sheets that smelled of lavender and lies, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life by choosing to trust a wolf king's promises. Outside, the capital glittered like scattered diamonds. Beautiful. Dangerous. And completely indifferent to the fate of one village healer who dared to show mercy to monsters. Audrey lasted exactly 2 hours in the opulent prison before she couldn't breathe anymore. The silk sheets felt like they were suffocating her. The marble walls pressed inward despite their vast expanse. Every surface gleamed with wealth she'd never dreamed of possessing, and all of it felt like a beautiful lie designed to make her forget she was trapped. She needed air. She needed space. She needed anything except this gilded cage where everyone wanted her dead or controlled or broken into something useful. The balcony doors opened easily, no locks, because why would there be? She was 3 stories up with guards at every exit. Where could she possibly run? Audrey stepped into the night air and gripped the stone railing until her knuckles went white. Below, the Capitol spread out like a carpet of stars, thousands of lights marking lives she'd never touch, people who'd never know her name except as the king's inconvenient liability. The wind carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine and something wilder, pine and stone and the distant promise of forests beyond the city walls. Freedom. So close she could almost taste it. You're thinking about jumping. Audrey spun to find Tackett emerging from the shadows near her doorway. He'd changed from his formal armor into simpler clothes, dark shirt and trousers that made him look less like a king and more like the wolf she remembered. His frost-blue eyes caught the moonlight, glowing faintly in the darkness. I'm thinking about a lot of things, Audrey said, turning back to the city. None of them involve staying here. The fall would kill you. His voice held no judgment, just quiet observation. And me, most likely. The bond works that way. Then maybe we'd both be better off. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. At least then I wouldn't have to face your council's trials or their contempt or whatever fresh hell tomorrow brings. Tackett moved to the railing beside her, keeping a careful distance. You meant what you said. About taking the trials. Did I have a choice? Audrey laughed, sharp and humorless. Your Lady Morgana would have found some way to test me regardless. At least this way, I control the narrative. I'm not a coward who hides behind her king. You're not hiding behind anyone. Tackett's hands gripped the railing, his knuckles as white as hers. You've never hidden from anything in your life. That's what terrifies me. Something in his voice, raw, unguarded, made Audrey turn to face him. In the moonlight, stripped of crown and ceremony, he looked younger. Tired. Almost as lost as she felt. What terrifies you? She asked. That I'll fail your trials. That I'll embarrass you in front of your precious council. That they'll hurt you. The words came out low, fierce. That I'll have to watch while they test you with silver and blood and magic designed to break the weak, and I won't be able to stop it without proving every fear they have about me being compromised. Then let me go. Audrey's voice cracked. Break this bond, send me home, tell your council I failed or lied or whatever story makes this easier. I never asked to be your anchor. I never asked for any of this. I can't. Tackett turned to face her fully, and the anguish in his expression stole her breath. Don't you understand? Breaking the bond would kill us both. The magic is too deeply rooted. It's been growing for 23 years, feeding on every moment I watched over you, every time I felt your fear or pain or loneliness. It's not something that can be severed cleanly. Then what am I supposed to do? Audrey's hands shook. Just accept that my life isn't mine anymore. That some childhood kindness trapped me in a destiny I never chose. I saved you because you were dying, Tackett. Because leaving you to suffer felt wrong. I didn't know it would cost me everything. I know. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You think I don't know what this cost you? I felt every punishment your father gave you for those stolen scraps. Every night you went to bed hungry because you'd fed me instead. Every moment of terror when you thought he'd discover your secret. His hands clenched into fists. You gave me everything when you had nothing. And I repaid you by tying you to a throne full of vipers who see you as a weapon or a weakness. Then why bring me here? Audrey's voice rose, years of buried emotion finally breaking free. Why drag me into this nightmare? If you cared so much, why not just leave me alone? Let me have my quiet life and forget the bond existed. Because they would have found you anyway. Tackett's control shattered. The corrupted Wolfborn are hunting anyone connected to pure bloodlines. They would have tracked you down, tortured you for information about me, killed you slowly just to watch me feel it through the bond. At least here, surrounded by my soldiers and my power, you have a chance at survival. A chance? Audrey laughed bitterly. Your council wants me dead. Your nobles think I'm a threat. Even your protection feels like another cage, Tackett. I've spent my entire life being controlled, by my father, by poverty, by fear. And just when I finally built something that was mine, you show up and strip it all away. I never wanted to strip anything from you. Tackett's voice broke. I wanted to give you everything. Freedom, safety, a life where you never had to be afraid or hungry or alone. That's what I spent 23 years building, a kingdom strong enough to deserve you, power enough to protect you, wealth enough to erase every hardship you suffered. I don't want your wealth. Tears burned Audrey's eyes. I don't want a kingdom or protection or destiny. I want choice. I want the right to decide my own life without bonds or fate or wolf kings making decisions for me. Then choose. Tackett stepped closer, his frost-blue eyes blazing with barely contained emotion. Right now. Choose whether you stay or go. Choose whether you face the trials or flee. Choose whether you hate me or trust me or something in between. But choose for yourself, Audrey. Not because of the bond, not because I'm demanding it, but because it's what you want. The question hung between them, sharp and impossible. What did she want? To run. To stay. To scream at the unfairness of being bound to a man she'd saved as a child. To understand why that same bond made her chest ache every time she looked at him. To be free. To be safe. To matter to someone without it costing her everything. I want to not be alone anymore, Audrey whispered, the truth ripping out of her. I spent my whole life invisible. My father looked through me. The villagers avoided me. I built walls so high no one could hurt me, and then you appeared and shattered every single one. And now I'm here, terrified and furious and so tired of pretending I don't feel this bond pulling at me every second. I feel it too. Tackett's voice roughened. Every moment since I left that mill, I've felt you. Your loneliness became mine. Your fear, your pain, your rare moments of joy, all of it echoes through me like a second heartbeat. You think you're alone. Audrey, I haven't been alone in 23 years because part of me has always been with you. The bond flared between them, sudden, overwhelming, a surge of shared emotion that hit like a tidal wave. Audrey gasped as Tackett's feelings crashed over her, fierce protectiveness mixed with desperate fear, guilt tangled with something deeper that felt dangerously like devotion, and beneath it all, a bone-deep terror that he would lose her the way he'd lost everyone else he'd ever loved. But it wasn't one-sided. Her emotions flooded back through the connection just as powerfully, anger and fear, yes, but also reluctant trust, the ache of recognition every time she looked into his frost-blue eyes, the traitorous warmth that bloomed in her chest when he called her essential. The bond amplified everything, feeding their feelings back and forth until Audrey couldn't tell where her emotions ended and his began. It was too much, too intense, like standing in a lightning storm with nowhere to hide. Tackett staggered, his hand going to his chest. His eyes flared with wolf light, and Audrey felt the beast rising in him, summoned by the emotional overload, by the primal need to protect his anchor even from the bond itself. Tackett. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Look at me. He tried, but the wolf was too close to the surface. His breathing turned ragged. Claws began to emerge from his fingertips. Audrey moved on instinct. She closed the distance between them and pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart where the bond pulsed brightest. Calm, she thought. Not a command, but an offer. Peace instead of chaos. Steady ground instead of drowning. The bond responded. Warmth flowed from her hand into his chest, spreading through him like light through dark water. Tackett's breathing slowed. The wolf light in his eyes dimmed. The claws retracted. His entire body went still beneath her touch, trembling slightly, like he was experiencing something profound and unexpected. "How did you do that?" he whispered. "I don't know." Audrey's hand remained over his heart, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath her palm. "I just wanted you to be calm, and the bond," it listened. The anchor ability. Tackett covered her hand with his, pressing it more firmly against his chest. "You're learning to use it. To channel the bond instead of letting it control you." They stood like that for a long moment, hands pressed together, the bond humming between them, no longer overwhelming but gentle, almost peaceful. Audrey could still feel his emotions, but they were manageable now, no longer a flood threatening to drown her. "I'm sorry," Tackett said finally. "For bringing you here without asking. For disrupting your life. For binding you to a throne full of dangers you never asked to face." His other hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch unbearably gentle. "But I can't be sorry for keeping you alive. I can't regret protecting you even if you hate me for it." "I don't hate you." The admission came easier than expected. "I'm angry. Terrified. Overwhelmed. But I don't hate you, Tackett. How could I when I feel what you feel? When I know every thought driving your decisions comes from wanting to keep me safe. You deserve better than safe." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You deserve free. Happy. Unbound by fate or destiny or kings too selfish to let you go. Then why don't you?" The question hung between them, soft and dangerous. Tackett's frost-blue eyes held hers, and in them Audrey saw everything the bond had already shown her, the boy who'd been dying until a small girl chose mercy, the man who'd built a kingdom while never forgetting her face, the wolf who would burn the world before letting her be harmed. "Because without you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I would have died that night by the river. Because your presence tempers my wolf's rage in ways no magic or meditation ever could. Because breaking this bond would kill us both, and I'm selfish enough to want us both alive." He paused, then continued with raw honesty that made her chest ache. "And because I fear losing you more than I fear losing my throne. More than I fear war or corruption or death itself. You're not my anchor because of magic, Audrey. You're my anchor because you're the only person who ever looked at me when I was broken and decided I was worth saving." Audrey's breath caught. The bond pulsed between them, carrying truths too deep for words. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Really?" Tackett's hand trembled against her cheek. "Everything you're willing to give. Your trust, if you can spare it. Your presence, because I've been lost without it. Your choice to stay, if you can make it." He drew a shaky breath. "And if destiny demands, if you ever decide I'm worthy, then perhaps the vow I made as a dying pup in that mill." "What vow?" His eyes held hers, luminous in the moonlight, and Audrey felt the weight of ancient promises settling around them like falling snow. "If destiny demands," Tackett said, his voice rough with emotion, "I will bow to you as my queen." The words landed like a lightning strike. Audrey stared at him, her heart hammering, the bond singing between them with something that felt dangerously like destiny recognizing itself. "I'm not queen material," she managed. "You saved a dying king when you were 10 years old." Tackett's smile was small, sad, achingly genuine. "You've been queen material since the moment you chose mercy over fear." Audrey didn't know what to say to that. So instead, she did what instinct demanded. She left her hand over his heart, feeling the bond steady and warm between them, and let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe childhood kindness hadn't trapped her. Maybe it had just been waiting for her to grow strong enough to claim what she'd always deserved. The silver trials had been postponed. Not cancelled, Lady Morgana had made that abundantly clear, but delayed by 3 days while Tackett insisted on taking Audrey to the ancient wolf-born sanctuary in the northern mountains. He needed answers about the bond's awakening abilities, he told the council. He needed the sanctuary elders to confirm what the trials would prove anyway. What he really needed, Audrey suspected, was time away from the court's poisonous atmosphere. Time for her to learn control before they tested her with silver and blood magic designed to break the weak. So they traveled north with a small contingent of soldiers, 20 warriors Tackett trusted absolutely, including Marcus, his captain, who watched Audrey with the wariness of a man assessing a potential threat to his king. The road wound through dense pine forests that reminded Audrey painfully of home. Not the cottage in Thornhaven, but earlier, the woods near her father's house where she'd first found a dying wolf and made a choice that rewrote her entire life. "You're quiet," Tackett said, riding beside her carriage. He'd offered to let her ride with him, but Audrey had declined. She needed space to think, to process everything that had happened on that balcony 2 nights ago. "If destiny demands, I will bow to you as my queen." The words haunted her. Not because they were romantic, though they were, in a terrifying sort of way, but because they represented a future she couldn't begin to imagine. Her, a queen. The girl who'd scrubbed floors and stolen bread and learned to make herself invisible just to survive. "I'm thinking," she called back through the window. "About? How to survive whatever fresh nightmare awaits us at this sanctuary." Tackett's expression darkened. "The elders are allies. They'll help you understand the bond, teach you to control." He stopped mid-sentence. His entire body went rigid in the saddle, head tilting like he was scenting the air. The soldiers immediately shifted into defensive positions, hands on weapons, horses dancing nervously. "What is it?" Marcus demanded. "Corruption." Tackett's voice dropped to a growl. "Close. Multiple signatures." Audrey felt it a heartbeat later, the bond flaring to life, showing her what Tackett sensed. Wrongness spreading through the forest like rot through healthy wood. Red eyes watching from shadows. Hunger barely contained beneath tattered remnants of humanity. "How many?" she called, her pulse hammering. "Too many." Tackett wheeled his horse to face the forest. "Get Audrey out of the carriage. Keep her in the center of the formation. If anything breaks through." The forest exploded. They came from all sides, corrupted wolf-born in various states of transformation, some still partially human, others fully consumed by the curse that had stripped away their minds and left only beast. Their eyes burned red. Black corruption leaked from their wounds like oil. They moved with mindless coordination, driven by a single purpose: kill the king and capture his anchor. "Protect Audrey." Tackett's command rang out as he dismounted. The soldiers formed a tight circle around her, but Audrey could see through the gaps, see the corrupted wolf-born crashing into their lines, see blood spray as claws met flesh, see her protectors falling one by one against overwhelming numbers. And she saw Tackett. He'd shifted partially, not full wolf, but something between, his body expanding with muscle and fur, claws extending, face elongating. He tore through corrupted wolf-born with brutal efficiency, each movement precise and deadly. But there were so many. For every one he killed, 2 more emerged from the trees. The bond pulsed frantically in Audrey's chest. She could feel Tackett's rising rage, the wolf inside him screaming to be released fully, to tear apart everything threatening his anchor. But he was holding back, maintaining control, because full transformation meant losing himself to instinct, and that meant he couldn't protect her strategically. He was going to lose this fight unless he let the wolf out completely. But if he lost control, he'd be as dangerous as the corrupted wolfborn attacking them. "We need to fall back," Marcus shouted, blood streaming from a gash on his shoulder. "There are too many." A corrupted wolfborn broke through the line. It happened so fast. One moment Audrey was surrounded by soldiers. The next, a massive creature was lunging at her, red eyes locked on her throat, jaws opening wide enough to bite her head off. The bond screamed. Tackett was too far away. The soldiers too slow. This was it, this was how she died, torn apart by a monster while the man she'd saved watched helplessly. Audrey's hand shot out on pure instinct. "Stop." The word wasn't spoken aloud, but the bond carried it like a command, channeling through her palm, through the connection linking her life to Tackett's and now, somehow, extending to the creature lunging at her. The corrupted wolfborn froze mid-leap. Its red eyes flickered with confusion. Its body trembled, caught between the corruption driving it to kill and something else, some deeper magic responding to the life anchor's will. Then Tackett hit it like an avalanche. He'd fully shifted now, all wolf, enormous and terrifying, his fur midnight black threaded with silver, his eyes blazing frost blue even in beast form. He was easily twice the size of the corrupted wolfborn, armored with muscle and ancient magic, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. He ripped the corrupted creature apart in seconds. But the transformation had cost him. Audrey felt it through the bond, the wolf rising, consuming, drowning the human consciousness beneath pure instinct. Tackett wasn't thinking anymore. He was hunting. Killing. Protecting his anchor with the single-minded ferocity of a predator defending its mate. He'd lost control. "Tackett." Audrey pushed past the soldiers trying to protect her. "Tackett, stop." He didn't respond. His massive head swung toward another corrupted wolfborn, and he lunged, all teeth and claws and unstoppable violence. The bond thrashed wildly in Audrey's chest, flooding her with his emotions, rage, bloodlust, the primal need to eliminate every threat. There was no room for reason in that storm. No space for the man beneath the beast. He was going to kill everything in sight unless she stopped him. Audrey ran. Marcus shouted behind her, tried to grab her arm, but she twisted away and sprinted toward the massive black wolf tearing through corrupted wolfborn like they were made of paper. Soldiers screamed warnings. The battle raged around her in a chaos of blood and claws and dying howls. She reached Tackett just as he finished killing his fifth corrupted wolfborn. His head swung toward her, jaws dripping blood, eyes blazing with wolf light that held no recognition. For a terrible moment, Audrey thought he'd attack her too. Then she pressed both palms against his massive chest, right over where she knew his heart beat beneath fur and muscle. "I'm here," she said, pushing calm through the bond with everything she had. "I'm safe. You protected me. Now come back." The wolf snarled, fighting the pull toward humanity. But Audrey didn't let go. She channeled the bond like she had on the balcony, offering peace instead of chaos, showing him through their connection that the threat was contained, that she was alive, that he could release the beast's control because his anchor was safe. "Come back to me, Tackett. Please." The bond flared so brightly it hurt, power surging between them, amplifying with each heartbeat. Audrey felt something click into place, like a lock finding its key. The connection deepened, solidified, became something more than emotional awareness. Her touch was stabilizing him. Anchoring his human consciousness even while his body remained wolf. She could feel his mind surfacing through the beast's rage, could sense the moment recognition return to those frost-blue eyes. Tackett's massive form shuddered. The wolf light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by human awareness wrapped in animal flesh. And then they felt it together, the bond's true power activating for the first time. Energy flooded through Audrey's hands into Tackett's body. Not just calm, but amplification. Her presence magnified his strength, sharpened his senses, reinforced the ancient magic that made wolf-born royalty so deadly. And simultaneously, his power flowed back through the bond, surrounding her with protection so absolute that nothing could touch her without going through him first. They were connected on a level beyond words. Two separate beings functioning as one unified force. The remaining corrupted wolfborn sensed the shift. They hesitated, their red eyes flickering with something that might have been fear. Tackett moved. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. Audrey remained pressed against his chest, her hands channeling the bond's power, amplifying every movement. When he lunged, he was faster than physics should allow. When he struck, his claws hit with force that shattered bone like glass. When corrupted wolfborn tried to flank him, Audrey sensed their approach through the bond and warned him without words, just pure intention flowing between their minds. They fought as a soul-bound pair, perfect and terrifying in their synchronization. The battle lasted 3 more minutes. When the last corrupted wolfborn fell, dissolving into oily shadows, Tackett shifted back to human form. He staggered, catching himself against a tree, his body covered in blood, some his, most not. Audrey tried to step toward him, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The world tilted sideways. She'd used too much power. The bond had drawn energy from her like water from a well, and now the well was empty. Her vision grayed at the edges. Her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Audrey. Tackett's voice was raw, terrified. Audrey, stay with me. She tried to respond, but the words wouldn't form. The bond pulsed weakly in her chest, exhausted, demanding rest she couldn't fight. I've got you. Tackett lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his bare chest. I've got you, little Ash. Just hold on. Little Ash. The childhood nickname cut through the fog clouding her mind. She forced her eyes open enough to see his face, streaked with blood and dirt and something that looked dangerously like tears. Did we win? Her voice came out barely a whisper. Yes. His arms tightened around her. You saved me. Again. You anchored me when I lost control and amplified my power until nothing could stand against us. He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath ragged. But you poured too much of yourself into the bond. You need rest. Healing. Time to. Fine, Audrey mumbled, though she absolutely wasn't. Just tired. You're not fine. You collapsed from power overload. Tackett started walking, no, running, carrying her toward the carriage while shouting orders to his soldiers. Marcus, clear the carriage. Get the medical supplies. We need to reach the sanctuary now. Audrey's consciousness flickered. She caught fragments, Tackett's arms never releasing her, his heart hammering against her cheek, the bond humming weakly between them like a candle flame in wind. Stay awake, Tackett urged, his voice cracking. Please, Audrey. Don't leave me. Not after we finally learned to fight together. Not when I just found you again. Not leaving, she managed. Just sleeping. No. No sleeping. You could have a concussion. Internal damage. The bond strain could have. Tackett. She forced her hand up to touch his bloody cheek. Trust me. Like I trusted you. His jaw clenched, but he nodded. Audrey let her eyes close, the bond's exhausted pulse lulling her into darkness. Her last conscious thought was that they'd done it, fought as one, survived impossible odds, proven the bond's power in the most brutal way possible. And Tackett had called her Little Ash. Like she was still that 10-year-old girl offering bread to a dying wolf. Like 23 years hadn't changed what she meant to him. Like she'd always been his, and he'd always been hers, and the bond was just destiny finally catching up to what their hearts had known from the beginning. Audrey woke to silver light and the scent of ancient stone. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to a chamber unlike any she'd seen before. The walls were carved from living rock, veined with luminescent threads that pulsed like captured starlight. Above her, a domed ceiling depicted constellations she didn't recognize, wolf-shaped formations that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. She was lying on something soft, covered in blankets that smelled of mountain herbs and moonflowers. Her body ached with deep exhaustion, but the sharp edge of bond strain had dulled to manageable soreness. "You're awake." Tackett materialized from the shadows so quickly Audrey startled. He looked terrible, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed, still wearing the same blood-stained clothes from the ambush. He dropped into the chair beside her bed like his legs had finally given out. "How long?" Audrey's voice came out raspy. 2 days. His hand found hers, gripping tight like he was afraid she'd disappear. "You've been unconscious for 2 days while the sanctuary healers worked to stabilize the bond strain. They said," his voice cracked. "They said you poured so much of yourself into amplifying my power that you nearly burned out your own life force." Audrey remembered fragments, the battle, the bond flaring, the sensation of pouring everything she had into making Tackett unstoppable. "But we won. We won." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You saved my life. Again. And nearly killed yourself doing it. Seems fair." Audrey managed a weak smile. "You saved me from that corrupted wolfborn. We're even. We'll never be even." Tackett lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like prayer and promise combined. "But the elders want to speak with you. When you're ready. They have answers about the bond." Audrey sat up slowly, her head swimming. Tackett immediately moved to support her, his arm around her shoulders, steady and warm. The bond hummed between them, quieter than before, but deeper, like it had settled into new grooves carved during the battle. "I'm ready now," she said. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. Instead, he helped her stand, draped a robe of soft silver fabric around her shoulders, and guided her through corridors carved from moonstone and shadow. They emerged into a circular chamber where 3 figures waited, elders so ancient their hair had gone pure white, their eyes the same frost blue that marked wolf blood royalty. They wore robes embroidered with wolf head crests and carried staffs carved from wood that seemed to grow and shift in their grip. The eldest, a woman whose face was a map of centuries, stepped forward. Audrey Reyes. Her voice resonated like bells in deep caves. The girl who saved a dying king and bound herself to the wolf blood throne without knowing what she'd done. Audrey lifted her chin. "I'm told you have answers. We have truths." The elder gestured to a stone altar at the chamber's center, where silver light pooled like liquid starlight. "The bond you share with King Tackett is no accident. It is soul mark recognition, a pact formed when 2 beings recognize each other as essential to their survival. Not just physical survival, but spiritual." Another elder spoke, his voice like grinding stone. "Such bonds were common in the ancient days, before corruption and politics weakened the wolf bloodlines. A king would recognize their anchor, the one person whose presence steadied their beast, whose will could temper their rage, whose life force could amplify their power to impossible heights. And in return, the 3rd elder added, her eyes knowing, the anchor gained gifts. The ability to sense corruption, to see truth beneath deception, to command the bond's power for protection and clarity." Audrey felt the truth of their words resonating in her chest. "I felt it during the battle. I could sense where the corrupted wolfborn would attack. I could amplify Tackett's strength just by touching him. You anchored his humanity while he fought his beast." The eldest elder moved closer, studying Audrey with eyes that saw too much. "Do you understand what that means, child. A wolf blood in full transformation loses reason, becomes pure instinct. They cannot distinguish friend from foe. But you held him. Kept his mind present even while his body was pure wolf. That is the deepest manifestation of the anchor bond, the ability to keep your king human even when he wears beast's flesh. Tackett's hand tightened on Audrey's. She could feel his emotion through the bond, all mixed with fierce protectiveness, gratitude tangled with fear of losing her. There's more, the eldest continued. The bond has fully awakened now. You will find you can sense lies as easily as breathing. Corruption will show itself to you like stains on white cloth. Truth will ring in your mind like clear bells. You have become the king's most valuable advisor, because you cannot be deceived. The implications crashed over Audrey. Lady Morgana's schemes would be transparent. The council's plots would reveal themselves. Every corrupted wolf-born hiding in plain sight would glow like beacons in her awareness. This is why they want me dead, she said quietly. Not just because I'm bound to Tackett, but because I can see what they're trying to hide. Yes. The eldest's expression held something like sympathy. You are the greatest threat to corruption in this kingdom. And the greatest asset to the throne. Which makes you both invaluable and impossibly dangerous to those who profit from shadows and lies. Audrey looked at Tackett. The silver trials. They'll reveal this, won't they? That I can see corruption. They'll try to kill you with silver and call it testing. His voice was flat, cold. Morgana knows what you are now. The ambush wasn't random, it was coordinated. She sent those corrupted wolf-born to eliminate you before the trials could prove your worth. Then we expose her. Audrey's voice steadied with sudden conviction. We go back, I take the trials, and when I survive, because I will survive, I use this bond to reveal every corrupted noble hiding in your court. The elders exchanged glances. The eldest smiled, sharp and approving. You have your mother's fire, she said. And your father's stubbornness. Both will serve you well in the court of fangs and silver. Audrey froze. You knew my parents. Your mother was wolf blood. The words hit like lightning. Distant lineage, nearly forgotten, but present nonetheless. She married a human against her family's wishes and paid for it with isolation. But her blood runs in your veins, child. It's why the bond took root so deeply. It's why you can anchor a king when no ordinary human could survive the strain. The chamber spun. Audrey's entire understanding of herself fractured and reformed. She wasn't just some lucky village girl. She carried ancient magic in her blood, inherited from a mother who died too young for Audrey to remember her face clearly. I'm wolf blood, she whispered. Barely. The eldest touched Audrey's forehead, and images flashed through her mind, a woman with Audrey's eyes standing beside a tall man with frost-blue gaze, love and defiance in equal measure on both their faces. But enough to matter. Enough to survive what's coming. The vision faded, leaving Audrey breathless. Tackett was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Your mother. She was. From a branch family. The eldest's voice gentled. No claim to throne or title, but carrying the blood nonetheless. She fell in love with a human, and her family disowned her. She died young, and your father, grief-broken and bitter, never told you what you were. Audrey's hands trembled. All those years of feeling different, of seeing too much, of sensing emotions beneath surfaces, it hadn't been imagination or trauma. It had been blood memory. Inherited magic too diluted to manifest fully but strong enough to recognize a dying wolf-blood prince and bind herself to him forever. I need air, she managed. Tackett guided her out of the chamber, through passages that opened onto a balcony overlooking mountains silvered by moonlight. The sanctuary perched on a cliff face, surrounded by ancient forests that stretched to horizons Audrey couldn't see. They stood in silence while she processed everything. Tackett didn't push, didn't demand reactions. He just stayed close, his presence steady, the bond humming between them like a second heartbeat. Finally, Audrey spoke. "If I do this, if I go back and face the trials and expose the corruption in your court, I'm choosing it. Not because of blood or bonds or destiny. Because I'm choosing to protect people who can't protect themselves from monsters wearing noble faces. I know." Tackett's voice was rough with emotion. "And I'm not doing it because I love you." She turned to face him, needing him to understand. "I don't know you well enough for that yet. Maybe someday, but not today." "I know," he repeated, softer. "But I'm not doing it alone either." Audrey held his gaze. "If we're going to survive what's coming, the corruption, the court, whatever war is rising, we do it as partners. Equal. You don't command me, and I don't just follow orders. We decide together." Tackett's eyes blazed with something that looked like hope and relief combined. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a chain. Suspended from it was a crescent-shaped feather, silver-white and gleaming, identical to the one Audrey had hidden in her hearth. "I kept this," he said, lifting the chain over his head. "For 23 years, I carried it everywhere. A reminder of the girl who chose mercy when the world taught her only cruelty. A promise that I would find her again and give her everything she deserved." He placed the chain around Audrey's neck, the feather settling against her chest where the bond pulsed warmest. "I'm not asking you to love me," Tackett continued, his hands cupping her face with reverence. "I'm asking if you'll stand with me. Fight beside me. Help me build a kingdom where kindness isn't weakness and mercy isn't foolishness. Where children like we were, broken and afraid and alone, have someone powerful enough to protect them." Audrey felt tears burn her eyes. The feather warmed against her skin, and through the bond she felt everything Tackett couldn't put into words, his absolute conviction that she was essential, his determination to be worthy of her trust, his willingness to give her all the time she needed to choose him for real instead of because fate demanded it. "Yes." The word came out steady, certain. "I'll stand with you." Tackett's relief was so profound the bond shook with it. He pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home, strong arms, steady heartbeat, the scent of pine and moonlight and the wolf she'd saved so long ago. "Together," he whispered against her hair. "Together," Audrey confirmed. They stood like that while moonlight painted the mountains silver and the bond settled into new depths between them. Below, the capital waited with its courts of corruption and schemes. Ahead, battles loomed, silver trials and political warfare and corrupted clans rising in the shadows. But for this moment, on a balcony carved from ancient stone, two people bound by childhood mercy and ancient magic made a different kind of vow. Not of love, not yet. But of partnership. Of choosing each other despite impossible odds. Of facing whatever darkness came with the certainty that together, anchored and amplified, they were stronger than any force trying to tear them apart. Audrey Reyes had saved a dying wolf because mercy felt right. Now she would save a kingdom for the same reason. And the Wolf King who'd waited 23 years to find her again would stand beside her every step of the way, not as her master or her debt, but as the one person who understood that true strength came from choosing kindness even when the world demanded cruelty. The moon hung full and bright above them, blessing what the bond had already sealed. Two souls, forever anchored. One destiny, finally claimed. And a kingdom that would either rise or fall based on the choices of a girl brave enough to save monsters and a king loyal enough to never forget her. The story was just beginning. Subscribe now to follow Audrey and Tackett's journey as they face the silver trials and expose the corruption threatening the wolf blood throne. This is just the beginning of their story. And comment below, where are you watching from, and are you ready for part 2? What do you think happens next? Drop your location and predictions. Let's build this community together, ***.